Join us on Patreon and become part of our journey to uncover history's untold stories. Your support helps us create in-depth content, bring hidden narratives to life, and keep history alive for everyone.
In the hushed halls of ancient monasteries in the Ethiopian highlands, among scrolls written in Guizi on animal parchment, lie clues to a truth so jarring it challenges the bedrock of Western religious history. These texts whisper of saints with skin like obsidian and bloodlines flowing from the Nile, of serpents not evil but enlightened, and of gospels that read more like origin stories of African divinity than European salvation. But what happened to these stories? Why are they not in the Bibles read by billions today? Could it be that a deliberate cleansing occurred, one not only of theology but of ethnicity? The Vatican, center of the world's most influential church, has for centuries stood as gatekeeper of biblical canon. And in that role, did it actively remove or silence black saints whose presence testified to a very different story of early Christianity? To investigate this, one must return not merely to Roman times but far earlier, to Egypt, to Nubia, to the very lands where Christianity first took root and bloomed in the shadow of African pyramids. Before Rome ever claimed authority, the early Christian world was dominated by thinkers, martyrs, and mystics whose skin color mirrored the sands of Cush and Aksum. Names like Saint Moses the Black, Saint Anthony the Great, Saint Cyprian of Carthage, and Saint Maurice, the Black commander of the Theban legion, once resounded through Coptic hymns and Byzantine prayers alike. These figures were not outliers, they were foundational. Saint Moses the Black, a former Ethiopian robber turned desert monk, was known for his spiritual power and radical forgiveness, achieving sainthood among early Egyptian Christians. Saint Maurice, a general in the Roman army from Upper Egypt, led thousands of black soldiers and was martyred for refusing to kill fellow Christians. His image, once carved into cathedral stones in medieval Europe, was later whitewashed, his identity progressively erased as Christendom became increasingly Europeanized. The process of exclusion was subtle at first. Artwork began to depict saints with lighter features, hagiographies downplayed ethnic origins, and relics were moved from African monastic centers to European cathedrals. But the real purge occurred during the various councils where the biblical canon was solidified. The Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, the Council of Carthage in 397 AD, and later Tridentan reforms saw the omission of Gospels, letters, and writings that conflicted with emerging Roman orthodoxy. It was not just theology that was under review. It was also lineage. Some of these excluded texts, such as the Book of Enoch, survived only in the Ethiopian Orthodox canon, where they were preserved by monks far from Rome's gaze. This same Ethiopian tradition holds scrolls that paint a radically different picture of Genesis and Eden. In these versions, the serpent is not a deceiver, but a bearer of wisdom, a creature associated with ancient knowledge and healing. According to the Kebra Nagast and related Ethiopic writings, the serpent's role in the garden is not satanic but revelatory. He is a symbol of hidden truths, much like the serpent on the staff of Moses or the medical caduceus still used today. Western Christianity's demonization of the serpent may reflect not an ancient truth, but a political and racialized recasting of Eden's story. Ethiopia, which remained independent of European colonialism and Christian hegemony for millennia, retained a radically older version of the biblical story, one where Eve's eating of the fruit led to an awakening, not a fall. In these texts, Adam and Eve do not sin, they grow conscious. The serpent becomes a necessary teacher in humanity's journey toward understanding. This contradicts the Vatican's long-standing interpretation and raises uncomfortable questions. What was lost in translation? Or more pointedly, what was removed? Throughout the medieval and Renaissance periods, as European colonial powers expanded, the image of a white European Christ was cemented. The rise of white supremacy, imperial domination, and racialized theology required a cleansing of Christianity's African roots. Black saints, black angels, and black Christologies were no longer politically viable. The Vatican, whether by deliberate decree or through centuries of cultural bias, played its part. African saints were forgotten, their feast days eliminated, their likenesses re-rendered. By the 15th century, Depictions of Saint Maurice in white armor, with European features, replaced earlier representations of a black general in African attire. Art history confirms this shift. In the earliest European paintings, such as those in the Cathedral of Magdeburg, Germany, Street Maurice is clearly African, his features unmistakable. But over time, these were repainted. The Renaissance era, in particular, saw a campaign of aesthetic cleansing where even the Madonna and Child began appearing with porcelain skin and blonde hair, a far cry from the Semitic or African features the historical figures would have had. These changes were not innocent. They mirrored the Vatican's tacit endorsement of a racial hierarchy embedded within the Church's theology. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church, on the other hand, retained a very different spiritual memory. In its liturgies, chants, and manuscripts, Christ remains a figure of color, a son of Africa. The Holy Family's flight into Egypt is not seen as a footnote. It is seen as a homecoming. And the saints, male and female, are depicted with dark skin and braided hair, reflective of the people among whom these stories first thrived. Modern scholars such as Dr. John G. Jackson, Dr. Yosef Ben-Jochanan, and others have documented how early African Christianity was systematically erased or rebranded. Archaeological findings in Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia, including monasteries carved into mountains and churches filled with black iconography, bear witness to a long-buried reality. The Vatican's vast library, with its restricted sections, is rumored to house texts that detail these truths, scrolls that never made it into the modern Bible, perhaps because they told a story too African, too powerful, too destabilizing for a Eurocentric church to accept. What, then, are we left with? A sanitized Bible, stripped of black saints, robbed of its African geography, and reshaped by the ambitions of empire. The consequence is not merely historical, it is spiritual. Millions of believers today read scriptures that no longer reflect the cultures, colors, or contexts in which they were born. The removal of black saints is not just an act of racial erasure, it is a spiritual theft. It severs modern people from their ancestors, from the roots of their faith, and from a deeper truth that predates Rome, predates the Vatican, and whispers still from the highlands of Ethiopia. Perhaps it is time, now more than ever, to return to the older texts, to the desert fathers of Egypt, to the scrolls of Lalibela, to the living legacy of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. In doing so, we may not only reclaim lost saints, we may restore a fractured history. And in the process, we may begin to see Eden not as the beginning of human failure, but as the birthplace of awakening, guided not by a devil in disguise, but by a serpent of wisdom offering the fruit of divine knowledge.